Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features Uncanny X-Men -1, cover dated July 1997. So the cover is extremely Kirby-esque because the artist is Jose Ladronn here, and the inker Juan Vlasco, and obviously aping the Jack Kirby style here, which is really intriguing because Kirby, when he returned to Marvel in the mid to late 70s after the abandonment of the Fourth World material at DC Comics, when he returned, he was the subject of some jokes and mockery from some of the young guns of 1970s Marvel. He was known by the title Jack the Hack by some of those characters, which really gave, and he was coming back to Marvel in his early 60s, so he was getting old at that point. And it gives you a kind of like a taste of how Kirby's style had in some sense become stale or old hat or associated with an earlier form of superhero comics at that point. But here in the mid to late 90s, there's a reevaluation. I mean, Kirby died in 1994, so there's a reevaluation of his work and his star is rising once more. And so you have an artist like Ladronn imitating Kirby and doing quite well. And of course, it is appropriate for a flashback issue that takes place before the story takes place before X-Men #1, 1963. But if you take a look at the corner box up here, you've Rachel Summers, aka Phoenix, and who's drawing that? Not Ladronn. Can you recognize the artist? It's Brian Hitch. So he's the artist for the interior comic itself. Now let's open this one up to the splash page. This picks up from the end of the previous issue. The title of the story is The Boy Who Saw Tomorrow, and the creative team: Scott Lobdell, writer; Brian Hitch, penciler; Paul Neary, inker. The rest of the creative team: Richard Starkings and Comicraft on the digital lettering, and Steve Buccellato on the digital colors. So the gimmick in every one of these flashback issues is that they are narrated, prologue and epilogue, by Stan Lee. So here he is, and he says here, explosions. Let it be known that Stan Lee loves explosions. Know why? You don't have to write any dialogue for them. So Stan, with his trademark cheesy humor there, really cool anchor image of this Kirby tech, turns out to be a telescope. Where he is looking out into the stars, and he continues here, I think we just saw the X-Men ship get into a world of trouble. Hey, since we can draw whatever we want, we might as well make it big. Hey, is that Zen-La, the surfer's lost planet? Nah, just a speck of dust on the lens. So here you've got the building that is the headquarters of Marvel Comics in the late 90s, 387 Park Avenue South, New York. And so Stan is up on the roof, but he's making his way to the stairs to go down into the Marvel offices. But now, true believers, it's time to leave our swinging scope, because big-hearted Stan has a tantalizing treat for you. So, interesting device to open, like the X-Men in peril in space. Stan looking at it through this Kirby tech telescope, and now we're moving into our flashback setup. So cast aside your fear and doubts, he says, as you prepare to join me in the hallowed halls of Marvel. So he's dressed as the Watcher here as well. Another little joke in respect of him peering through that telescope and his role in the flashback month issues. This is our world famous Hall of Statues, and if you don't recognize each and every one of them, he says, we may send you back to our competitors. Looks like the guy who sculpted the Hulk got away, or should have been, or got carried away, or should have been. So that's really nice images there of some key Marvel characters. I'm sure you can recognize all of them. Interesting to see Spider-Woman there as well. Here's where they're redoing the statues of the Fantastic Four. He says, if they can ever figure out what they look like. The FF changes more often than a baby's diaper. But hey, even Superman's been known to change his costume, because at this point in time, Superman is in that mid to late 90s blue lightning, I call it the blue lightning look that he had at that point after coming back from the dead. And now for those of you who are mad about mutants, says Stan, here's the head honcho who started it all. So we get a vision there of Professor X next to Jack and me. Now I made the point in the -1 issue, flashback issue of X-Men, the adjectiveless X-Men title, that there was no mention of Jack Kirby, but there is here, and so that is intriguing. You know him as Charles Xavier, the guy who proved bold can be beautiful. And now we get to see Hitch doing the original X-Men here. We've got a little side shot of Wolverine there with the pop claws. I really like this version, this little panel of Havoc and Polaris. The late 60s gave us Havoc and Polaris, says Stan. And we met Colossus and Nightcrawler in the mid-70s, while the 80s brought us a team featuring Longshot and Storm. Remember her way cool mohawk hairdo, he says. And here's Rowe, Gambit and Bishop in their 90s costumes. The toughest part is remembering all their names. Who can tell me when Xavier first got his new wheelchair? Adjectiveless X-Men #1, Stan. I missed a few issues, he says. I'm still trying to catch up, but if you think you know the true origin of the X-Men, I've got a few surprises for you, he says. So let's turn the page and see what the surprise is. Well, we're into the flashback now. And now, to quote the immortal Irving Forbush, let the flashback begin, so it rolls. And the story begins, it's a quiet house along a tree-lined street in the sleepy college town of Annandale-on-Hudson, New York. Now, long-time readers would know who grew up as a child in that sleepy college town. Jean Grey, of course, a place where content people live, thinking content thoughts, living quiet, uneventful lives. So we're zooming in on the bedroom window there through the tree branches. Good use of screen tone as well. Perhaps no man is more content than Professor John Grey. It was only several months before this night that he had thought he'd lost his 11-year-old daughter forever. So Professor John Grey is a professor at Bard College, which was in fact Chris Claremont's alma mater, where he did his degree in political theory and drama. So, still awake, Jean? Asks the professor. You caught me, she says. I was just saying my prayers, and I guess I got carried away about Professor Xavier. So interesting to see, Jean being brought up in a house in which there is a bit of religion. It's just that after what happened to my head, after what happened with Annie, I just feel like he helped make me normal again. So this is the first manifestation of Jean's powers, the issue in which it's told, authored by Chris Claremont, Bizarre Adventures number 27. And we'll get some of it here where she entered the mind of her young friend when she was run over by a car and died. And Jean's the first manifestation of her mutant powers was to enter into her friend's mind as she died, which traumatized her and led her to shutting down until Professor Xavier helped her come out of her shut down state. Now, something to note about the layouts here is that Brian Hitch is imitating the original Jack Kirby style layouts. So Kirby layouts were usually a 6-panel grid or the 4-panel grid here, or variations thereof. So that's what we're going to get for the most part with the flashback story. You'll get no argument out of me, Princess, he was about to say, and she sees a shooting star, a falling star, she says. That must mean I'm better, right? And he says, that's hard for me to say, Jean, because I've always thought you were perfect, and they both say at the same time, and you can't get any better than that. And so she replies as she tucks her into bed, oh, Daddy, you always say the same thing, only because it's always true. Now to sleep. You have your first day back at school tomorrow. So Jean, like a happy childhood, again, after the trauma of what happened with her friend. And Professor John Grey, very much characterized as a good man. In the background, you've got a sign of what year it is. So it's not 19, I don't know, what could it have been originally with 1963 being Jean arriving at the X-Men at the age of Professor X is at the age of 16, let's say, and so if she's 11, what would that make it, like 1958? Like, this would be 1958, but look what year it is. It's got to be 1977 or 1978 there, with the Star Wars poster on her wall, on her bedroom wall. So you've the Marvel Comics sliding timescale represented there. So the professor's grateful to Charles Xavier. When she saw her best friend die, it was as if Jean's heart died as well, because he doesn't know about her mutant power. Every specialist in the world told us her case was hopeless, that she'd remain in an extreme state of depression. Everyone except Professor Xavier, he says. As crazy as it seems, it's almost as if, as a result of all those treatments, he just reached in and pulled her from inside her own mind. However he did it, all I know is that I owe him a debt I can never repay. So are we going to get some untold story of young 11-year-old Jean Grey? Very difficult to draw children. Brian Hitch, he's trying his best here, but this does not look like an 11-year-old girl. This looks like a teenager, maybe 16 years old or something like that. But in any case, he gave it a go. And what about the falling star? More than half a continent away in the Black Hills of South Dakota, that falling star has landed. So this isn't a story about young Jean Grey, but it is a story about someone who has a connection to Jean, which proves to be very interesting. Far from being the cosmic manifestation of a young girl's symbol of hope, its sudden appearance on Earth speaks of matters considerably less romantic. For this anomaly, which has made its way through space and air and the veil of time itself, is not some lifeless ball of gas and dust. Rather, it is a human being. So who is it? Well, we know from the cover that it's Rachel. It's Rachel Summers. So it is Jean's possible future daughter. How naughty is X-Men continuity, especially when alternative timelines come into play. But really nice work here on this page by Brian Hitch. And you can see him, as I said earlier, imitating the Kirby layout, where we've got basically a 6-panel grid, but Kirby would sometimes bring 2 panels together for a full horizontal wide panel shot like that one. Now, this isn't exactly a Kirby layout here or on this page, but he will go back to the grid layout in subsequent pages. So the third person narration continues regarding Rachel. She's a singular person. There was a time during this century when she truly belonged, when she was part of a family. Those days have yet to come. So that's a reference to her joining the X-Men. And of course, after that, Excalibur. But for this young woman, they are the past. And though she has since made a life for herself some 2,000 years from this moment, Rachel Summers can't help but feeling she's come home. So this is all from the end of Alan Davis's run on Excalibur. That's where Rachel was left. I think I'm right about that. She only wishes she could be happy about it. And so she continues, when I chose to follow her through the centuries, I couldn't be sure where she was going or why. But by the form of this structure, the condition of the wood, it is clear we're somewhere in the latter half of the 20th century. Maybe a fraction of the Phoenix power I still wield will allow me to get some answers. She almost immediately regrets her decision as she lights up the barn and sees a master mold. The dark and foreboding prototype, a blueprint for genocide. It has come to be known as the master mold. So she sees it all makes sense now. Heaven help every one of us. Now I understand why she came to this specific area. But our question as readers at this point is, who's she to here and now? And I know more than ever why she must be stopped. This is very Alan Davis-esque. So Alan Davis wasn't happy at this point in time with the similarity between Brian Hitch's style and his own. He rather thought that Hitch was ripping off his style, and that Hitch should have his own style, and he would eventually develop a style that was more distinctive from Alan Davis's, but that particular panel, very Davis-like. At that moment, while not very far away, it might just as well be another world. So who's this guy? And it turns out he's not having any kind of flashback, he's having a flash forward. So he sees them, dark, threatening, violent, different from us, different and deadly. It's the X-Men. And it is the late John Byrne, Chris Claremont era X-Men with Kitty Pryde there as well as Sprite, trying to help us all, but others oppose them, want to destroy. No, the others want to kill humans. A human. So this is the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants and Destiny. Politician, a man of power. The human that can make a difference, Senator Robert Kelly. So he is flashing forward to having a prescient vision of the events of Uncanny X-Men, the seminal Uncanny X-Men issues 141 and 142, Days of Future Past. And now we're back to a Kirby layouts on these pages, the 4-panel grid and the 6-panel grid with the conjoined 2 panels here in the middle. Son, so it is Bolivar, Dr. Bolivar and his son Trask and his son Lawrence or Larry Trask. Son, I know you can hear the sound of my voice, he says. I need you to calm down, to understand this is only in your mind. Listen to my voice and follow it home. I'm waiting for you, Lawrence, he says. And he thinks to himself, but am I fooling myself? For even though Lawrence is the only one to see those images, these clairvoyant glimpses into the future, for him, they are real. As yet, the only thing that can stop the constant onslaught of chronal fragments on his mind is the amulet I created. Though he's at peace again, and I know he will awake with no memories of this incident, it means that I alone must bear the burden that my only son suffers from some sort of genetic mutation. So there is a parallel here between young Jean Grey and young but a little older Bolivar Trask here, and their manifestation of their mutant powers and their fathers concerned and taking care of them. But Professor John Grey, unaware of his daughter's incipient mutant power, whereas Bolivar Trask is onto it and worried about it. The home and laboratory of Dr. Bolivar Trask, an ordinarily brilliant man possessed of an extraordinarily secret shame. So he continues his thoughts there. Since the moment I understood my children were different from most, I've worked tirelessly to protect them. But from who? From themselves? From humans without these special, powers? From others like them who might try to exploit their abilities? Yet despite my efforts, I did fail my wife and my daughter. Tanya, how I miss you too. So a family photo there, Bolivar with the amulet on him, his wife, his daughter Tanya. So that's all established. And what of mankind's fate, he thinks. All my studies, all my research, as well as all the ramblings I've been able to record from Lawrence during his prescient episodes, lead me to conclude that people like Lawrence represent the next step in humanity's evolution. So who is this figure in shadow, in silhouette? In the foreground, well, it's Rachel, she's observing them, but we would wonder who's the she that Rachel was talking about? Could it be that person? And let's continue. So he's there helping his son up from having passed out. Come, Lawrence, where are you off to? He asks him, you need to rest. And the son says, I need to pull my weight around here, Father, instead of constantly being a burden to you, pulling you away from your life's work. So we see in the barn the bits and pieces of the sentinels that are being constructed, and Larry says, while the rest of the world is sleeping, you and I toil here, preparing for the day our government acknowledges the need for our sentinels. Soon, Father, they will understand. And the person here in the background thinks, sooner than you think, gentlemen. Which is why interesting, that is not Rachel. So this person here, the hair, it's not Rachel. Okay. So Bolivar there says, which is why you need your rest, Lawrence. Now go get a good night's sleep. Tomorrow's meeting with Special Agent Gyrick, so that's Henry Peter Gyrick, is vital, bringing us one step closer to the official support we'll need to win this genetic civil war which simmers on the horizon. So Bolivar goes out, and Rachel is there observing outside the barn. This is a really nice panel. I like the spotting of blacks, the casting of shadow from the tree outside the barn across her cloak there. Look at the little leaves, the shadows of the leaves on her cloaks. on her cloak. That's really nicely done, and the implication of the wind blowing out there as well. Some of the leaves are falling off the trees too. You can see a leaf there falling and around here. It's really well done, and the way that her hair is blowing in the wind too. Interesting stuff. I wonder, was that in the script? Was that in Lobdell's script that it's windy? Or is that Hitch adding that? In any case, I like it. So she's thinking here, I can understand her temptation. So this is the mysterious she. Because I know that years from now, this boy and his father and all the permutations of their technological bloodhounds are going to cause untold suffering to both mutants and humans. Just as I use a fraction of my psionic powers to make Larry Trask ignore my presence before him, it would be so simple, so easy to simply rearrange his thinking, realign his misguided priorities. So here's the ethical question here, and Rachel is not going to do that. And there's not just an ethical reason for not doing, but a practical reason. With something less than a straight thought, she thinks I could prevent 1,000 as yet unrealized tragedies. And yet, no one knows better than I the amount of damage that can be done once time is altered. The past is not a blank canvas that only needs to be repainted, she thinks. And now there is dialogue with the mysterious other woman. Anything to rationalize your cowardice, Rachel, says the woman psionically. That voice projected inside my head. I was right. She is here. So there's an attack. And the woman says, why don't you admit the real reason you do not take destiny into your hands is because you are weak. So let's see. Turn the page. Who is it? Who is the mystery woman? Well, she is wearing a hound costume. And initially I was thinking that looks like adult Kitty Pryde, but it isn't. So she says to Rachel, you shouldn't have followed me here, Rachel. You shouldn't have forced this confrontation. But then, from the moment you rescued me from my near mindless state, after years spent adrift in the time stream, where my untrained mutant powers sentenced me, you and I knew it would ultimately come to this, didn't we? And look at the Kirby crackle there in the background. Unlike you, I can't sit back and watch as these two great men, this father and son, help destroy a world through their genius and zeal. That is why I've returned to this era, to the eve of destruction, to turn them away from the conflagration that will consume us all. And Rachel addresses her psionically, but Sanctity, so that's her name, or code name. We've discussed this. You understand the risk you're taking, the damage to the sacred tapestry of time which you threatened to unravel. When we found each other, when we bonded in the time stream, you were all but insane. You know how wrong it is. So this is the reference to, it happened shortly after Excalibur 75 in an as yet untold tale of the Uncanny. So this is Lobdell drawing on story potential from Excalibur 75 and projecting it backwards to continuity pre Uncanny X-Men number 1, 1963. So the fight continues, the debate between them about changing the past or not. Wrong, don't talk to me about wrong, says Sanctity. What the genetic Dark Lord Apocalypse is doing in our future is wrong. The fact that humanity waited so long for the 12. So this is something that Chris Claremont seeded, the 12, and it's being dipped into once again. It's seeded in the script for X Factor issues, if I get the numbering right, 65 to 65, 66, 67, 68. The ones that were drawn by Wills Portacio, co-plotted with Jim Lee, but scripted by Chris Claremont as a mention of the 12. Even now, in our time, you're slowly gathering a sisterhood around you to prepare for the coming of some mythological being called the Uncanny Son. All of that is wrong, says Sanctity. And Rachel here starts manifesting the Phoenix Force, which means, of course, that she is superior in power to this person. And this, I think, is our cover, reversed. It's our cover corner box image of Rachel. Understand your pain, Sanctity, I share it, just as you must understand I can't let you do this. But you knew that. But it was a psionic echo. And Rachel refers to her as my best friend. So I always thought that Kitty Pryde was Rachel's best friend. So This is interesting that she would have a different best friend. She was distracting me so she could get closer to, let's turn the page, Trask's lab. So Trask is in there with this glowing tube of whatever it might be. And he becomes aware of someone in the shadows and in the sanctity. You knew I was here, she asks. He says, I knew it was only a matter of time before mutated humans would learn of my efforts, try to stop me, step into the light so I can. And he recognizes her. And she says now, hello, Father. Tanya, how is it possible? So that's his daughter. But it makes me go back to this particular moment where she was there sooner than you think, gentlemen. So that's kind of an odd way to refer to your father and brother, unless of course it's because she hasn't seen them from her experience hundreds of years or something like that. In any case, now she addresses him as her father. So they hug. Remember when I first started manifesting my genetic mutation, she says I would phase out of sync with time. Each spell found me away longer and longer. Someone, a friend, another mutant, ultimately pulled me to shore in the future. So that was Rachel. So far, so very far in the future. But you're home now, Tanya says. Bolivar, that's what's important. Home, she asks. But my time here is short, Father. The strain I'm putting on my mind and body to maintain a grip here in the past is taking its toll. I came here to convince you and my brother to abandon this crusade of yours. I know in my soul you're trying to do the right thing, but you must believe me when I tell you that this way lies only madness and death. I've witnessed it. But Rachel arrives to disrupt things. He can't hear you, she says psionically, just as I'll ensure he has no memory of having seen you this evening. Tanya replies psionically, everything I ever learned about my latent psionic and chronal abilities came from you. You know that I can't stop you in a fair fight, Rachel. I don't suppose it would help if I said please. So Rachel, of course, isn't going to agree to that. She asks, what were you hoping to gain by this? Nothing, everything, replies Tanya. Maybe the peace of mind in knowing that I tried. Maybe I just wanted to see my family again one last time. Notice the backgrounds are all blacked out, so this is going to speed up drawing these pages for Hitch. It's a time-saving device. But outside in the courtyard, young Bolivar sees the effects of the fight, the previous fight between Rachel and Tanya, and he knows something's up. So he's going back into the barn, and Rachel here is levitating Trask from his unconscious state onto the ground gently. And we have to go now, Sanctity, she says to her friend. There's no telling how much damage our presence here has already done. And Sanctity replies, you're right, of course, but just a moment to say goodbye. Even though he won't remember? Not in his head, no, but in his heart, perhaps, she says. Father, no matter what happens, somewhere, somewhen, your daughter loves you. So off they go. And we're told the first daughter of the X-Men... Sorry, I should read the whole thing. In the instant that they depart, Rachel is careful to guard her thoughts from her friend. For although she's relieved that tragedy has been narrowly avoided, the first daughter of the X-Men, the woman who will one day become the Mother Uncanny, the one who will ultimately be betrayed by Madame Sanctity, feels there is something about her friend's actions this day that she missed. So this is Lobdell seeding more developments, story developments in the future here in relation to these two and a coming betrayal. And Bolivar arrives, his father awakens, thinking that he must have passed out from exhaustion. And Bolivar talks about the signs out in the courtyard, that it's proof of an unseen threat. But the truth of the matter is Sanctity was successful on this day, declares the third person narration. For somewhere deep in the heart of an approaching darkness, she has managed to bury the seeds of hope. So what did she do on the computer? So we saw her at the computer. There she is at the computer in silhouette in the lab. Master mode program, internal mainframe, install program, then delete all references to same program designate the 12. So, and that is a coming storyline for the Xbox after Operation Zero Tolerance. So that's it. We're back to Stan Lee. Everything's been cleared away, the barn, the set. Okay guys, that's a wrap, he declares, getting up from the computer. The computer on which that text was written. Hope you paid strict attention to all the details, gang, because we may be planning a surprise quiz. Yes, we paid close attention, Stan. You know, we didn't do all this research just for our health. So off he goes, loving the perks of dressing up like the Watcher, and saying, now it's hasta la vista time. There are new mutants being born every minute, and I've got to sign them up before the distinguished competition can grab them. Excelsior. So that's the end of the flashback issue of Uncanny X-Men. So intriguing stuff. So 2 pages of letters there about Uncanny X-Men 343 and 344. But next up, Spidey versus Marrow. Just some advertisements at the end. Scott Lobdell talking about the Zero Tolerance event. And that is that. Well, I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on Uncanny X-Men -1. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section. If you enjoyed my review and commentary, please like and share the video. It really does help the channel. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.